Welcome to Life, bringing you insight and experiences into love, relationships, and fertility with a focus on enjoying life and moving forward. On today's podcast, we'll be speaking with three women about their fertility journeys. Welcome to Life, love, insight, fertility, experiences. I'm here with three women who wanted to share information on their fertility journeys with the goal of helping those on similar paths recognize they're not alone. These three ladies have their own unique story, and yet there are many common threads. For identification purposes, we'll be using anonymous names, so we'll be referring to one as P, one as H, and one as M. Thank you all for being here today. I thought it would be nice if we could take a moment to share a part of your journey and then continue our conversation. So, P, would you like to start?
Sure. So, going into this, I never expected that we would have to seek any type of fertility treatment. When my husband and I got married, we decided to wait to have children for about a year. And at that point, I was already 35 years old. And I had heard about being geriatric mother and all that.
That number's so scary.
Yes.
Right.
So, but I didn't think it would ever have an effect on me. So I saw my regular gynecologist. I think it was twice in 1 year. And then after that, we started trying and it just wasn't working. So we went to a fertility clinic and it was a sort of slippery slope. We got on Clomid for a few months and then got pregnant, which was great. And then I had a miscarriage, which was not great at all. And then we waited a few months and we did 2 rounds of IUI, which didn't work. And then we jumped into IVF. And during this whole time, we were not happy with our fertility clinic at all. I just never really felt comfortable. I didn't feel a connection to the doctors. I was really impatient and I didn't know that obviously I had other choices, but I just felt like I had to go with this one because I had started there.
Right. There's very much that feeling people have.
Right. And so then we did 1 round of IVF and we did a fresh transfer. And on that same day, my husband's best friend passed away. So that was incredibly hard. And the transfer didn't take. So that was, a huge curveball in our journey. And after that, we took a little bit of a break, decided to switch clinics. And then I like to think that my husband's friend was maybe watching over us because then we did have success with our second round of IVF. And I'm now pregnant.
And soon to be delivering.
Yes, and my due date is in 2 weeks, so yeah.
I had asked if you could just give a brief synopsis, but there's so much that goes into that. And some people would say, oh my goodness, like Clomid in 2 rounds, and then, this horrible loss, like a double loss.
Mm-hmm.
And others would look at it very differently because their journeys were so different.
Yes.
Right? Could either one of you relate to that or understand that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my journey was similar, but the duration was quite long.
Yes.
Which is painful in and of itself because you think when you start out, you think that you're going in to do this process with the outcome, to have a baby in the near future. So for me, it started when I had just around when I turned 38. My boyfriend and I had postponed, even though we had been together for years, we had postponed having kids because there was a lot going on in our life and just that sort of thing. So
life happens.
Yeah.
Right.
And the time goes, and that number 35 could be really scary, but it's not cut in stone. Some people have challenges at 25 and others at 40.
Right.
But it's just a number when eggs start to change, in a more significant manner.
Right.
I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's okay. And I knew that number 35 that everyone knows is like the scary point. And I had it on my mind after I turned 35. And finally, around when I was 38, I had said, we better start doing this or we're going to have some hardship coming our way. So little did I know, what was ahead of me. But I did get pregnant very quickly. Just a few months later, I was pregnant at 38. And I thought, what was I even worried about, but that pregnancy ended in a miscarriage at 9 weeks, and I had already heard the heartbeat and everything, so it was very, it was very unfortunate.
It's horrible.
Yeah,
it's a horrible experience.
Mm-hmm. But actually, it was a horrible experience, but I did take some hope that I did get pregnant so quickly.
Yes.
So I felt okay, and I had known a lot of people that had miscarriages, and although it's unfortunate, I thought it was kind of normal. My mother even had one when she was in her, early 30s. So I thought it was something that happened
and it is, and it's something that we've talked about with lots of different people and on this podcast before. They can't even quantify the number of miscarriages because there's so many of them.
Yeah, and some you don't even know. A lot of times you're not even aware you have a miscarriage because
right. And many say it's just nature's way.
Yes, right. We jumped back in and started trying again, and I got pregnant again very quickly. Another 2 months later, and that ended in another miscarriage. And so I basically, within a few weeks of having my second miscarriage, I was at the fertility clinic talking about IVF. At that point I was approaching 39, and I realized that, okay, now I'm going to have trouble. And I did do a few cycles of Clomid, which didn't work, and I became increasingly frustrated with the fertility clinic that we were at that point. So I did end up switching, even though, as what P said, where once you start somewhere, again, you're on like a time limit. I felt that I was on a time constraint where I just needed to get this done before I got any older, and I didn't want to go through the hassle of switching clinics. So it was a decision that I did decide to do. I decided to switch clinics in the midst of before I started an actual IVF cycle. So I switched to another facility, which I was happy with, and we jumped right into doing IVF. But this did take about 4 or 5 months before I was actually doing my first cycle, because then there was a couple different complications. I had cysts in my ovaries, and so that I had to get them removed before I started. So it's never as direct, or at least in my experience, it's not as direct as, you just go in, have IVF, and you're pregnant in 4 weeks. For me, it wasn't like that at all. So, from my first miscarriage, flash forward from over a year and a half later, I'm starting IVF now in my 39th, I'm 39 now. And so...
And age was something that was on your mind the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Because I was well aware, especially after you start entering the process, you start reading about statistics and stuff. And so I was aware that the older you got, especially approaching 40 and then post 40, it became much more difficult in general. So I had that on my mind. So I was in a rush to start IVF and to get pregnant, as quickly as I could. Anyway, I did do my first cycle, didn't end up very successful. I think everything was fine. I got a decent amount of eggs, but the fertilization rate wasn't very good, so I only ended up with 1 embryo. So at that point, I realized that I had to do a few different cycles to gather as many embryos as I could, sort of to, make hay while the sun still shines, kind of, so to speak. I was trying to just gather and batch as many as I could, so that I would end up with at least, a pregnancy out of it. So I did that, and I ended up doing 6 complete cycles without transfers, freezing the embryos. And at the end of the 6 cycles, I had 13 embryos, and it took an entire year of cycles. We did IVF egg retrieval cycles every other menstrual cycle month for a year. So. And froze all of the products, which was 13 embryos at the end of 6 cycles. And then we tested them for chromosome abnormalities. They can do that now because I wanted to avoid having any more miscarriages. And so they tested all 13, and actually none out of the 13 came back normal. So at the end of that year, we were, it was like the climax, and it was complete, devastating blow that we had nothing to show for it. And we were actually just, back to square one.
Right, especially when you think you have 13.
Yeah.
And then you realize what 13 can really amount to in
Right.
the end.
I mean, I thought I was going to have 4 kids.
And so do many. It's a hard conversation that a lot of the doctors have to have, explaining that many embryos or that many eggs can result in X amount of embryos.
Yeah, so it was very depressing. So that sort of dead ended our journey somewhat temporarily, but it took us a long time to kind of get up after that letdown.
Yes.
And so after that, we did do 2 more little mini IVFs with a different clinic. We went on another a second opinion just to find out. And generally, when you go through that, 6 cycles and 2 miscarriages, and you're approaching 40. I think I was 40 at this point.
I think so.
The most doctors, or at least the ones we encountered, would tell you that that was enough. That was enough money. That was enough emotional strain on your relationship, on your life, enough physical duration for medication, all of that. So
it's really a physical, emotional, and financial impact at that point.
Right.
Not that it's not at a first one, but as you go through the years, it becomes more so.
Right. Yeah. So, and I knew that to be true at that point. I had, put all my eggs in the basket, no pun intended, that I was going to do the 6 cycles, and I of course assumed I was going to be successful. But at that point, I knew that I was finished doing those sort of egg retrieval cycles. But I did try 2 more minimal medication cycles that we thought might yield some success, but they did not work either. So then we just stopped, and we didn't do anything for a year, and we signed up for some other non-traditional ways to go, like egg donor lists or adoption,
Right.
and which was a hard path to sort of look at as your only option at that point, especially because I was 40, which is old geriatric, for motherhood. But
I'd like to destroy that name.
Yeah, but there is many first-time moms in their 40s and in their early 40s, and so it's not unfeasible. But we had a nice year of no medication, and we took a lot of vacations, and then we ended up ultimately getting matched with an egg donor, and I had a beautiful baby girl.
Beautiful girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so,
And all the bonding is there. Everything is there. But what a difficult process to go through.
Yeah.
And what a different way to redefine how you're going to have your baby and how you're going to have your family.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And although it's not, when we started out in this process, it was sort of the thing that I couldn't even fathom it going that direction. And of course, I thought it would never happen to me. I was taking control of the situation. I was jumping in and going straight and gathering and saving all my eggs that I had left. And I never thought it would come to this. And if somebody told me at the beginning that I was going to end up with this type of ending, I would have been devastated. And it was devastating. But at the end of the day, I have a beautiful child that I would never change, anything about her.
Yeah.
And maybe the process, yes, but
I think it's so hard to share that. I know it is for you, and thank you. Because one of the things we spoke about was not misleading people about everybody else's journey. So
right.
I really appreciate you sharing that with everybody. Em, hi. Would you like to give us a little information about what happened?
Yeah, so I'm 41 now, to give you an idea of ages and timelines. And my husband and I actually started trying probably around when I was 33. So that was quite a long time ago. So when I hear some other stories, like when I'm hearing you guys talk, I'm so enamored by the fact that you're recalling these details, because I feel like the details at the time I could recall, but now looking back, it's really hard for me to remember I can't even remember how many cycles of IUI I did, for example. But so I'm going to try to just give a quick overview. So we probably we started trying in 2011 after a minor cancer scare. and then which ended up not being cancer. And it was basically a year after we were married. And I just had this feeling we were having trouble getting pregnant. And we really tried the natural, very conservative route for so long. Like I did acupuncture, I did all of this, everything, you name it, I did it. Chiropractic care, Mayan massages, like everything. And so I don't even remember when we went to our first fertility doctor. I think it was around 2013, and that was just to kind of like get started. And then we did, through that first clinic, we did so many IUIs. I took breaks. We actually went to another doctor after that. And you guys also talked about like switching doctors. It's so hard because I actually ended up seeing 3 doctors. And just, I understand the feeling of like having to start again. It's so frustrating. Starting again, starting at a different place, reviewing everything again.
Don't you also find that when you have to start with a new doctor, it's giving up the hope on that doctor and the trust that you had? So
Yes.
It also becomes the emotional connection and the trust because you start to have a bond with them when you first meet.
Yes. So we went to a second fertility doctor in probably around like 2014. And then he worked on some like natural thyroid treatment. We did more IUIs with injectables, Clomid, you name it. And then we ended up doing a round of IVF. The following month, I got pregnant. I had a miscarriage while I was traveling in China, and it was awful. And that was my first miscarriage. We ended up waiting again, probably like almost a year. We did another cycle of IVF. That one failed as well. And essentially, it led me to our third fertility doctor. And he actually pretty much like as soon as he saw me, he thought that I had endometriosis, and which I had asked every single doctor about because I had this feeling that I had it. And I kind of just got like, no, well, it doesn't affect fertility. And he felt like it does affect infertility. And he actually sent me to a surgeon who specializes in endometriosis. So in April of 2017, I had endometriosis surgery. I had multiple cysts removed. I had my right fallopian tube removed. And it was quite devastating, like going through that. And being diagnosed at 39 years old with endometriosis was really hard. And it was almost like an answer. But at that point, I still didn't know if that was going to bring me, to a pregnancy, to a healthy pregnancy. We actually did a round of IVF. So this is the third round of IVF we did the following month after that surgery. And I got pregnant, and I delivered a healthy baby girl who is now 15 months old, which, is amazing. And it's the answer that I wanted.
Thank you for sharing everything you went through. The 3 of you had such different paths that you went down and such different ways to have a baby and to have the family that you want. And yet there were so many common themes that people have to experience. And that's what I think is the interesting thing to really talk about, is this desire to have a family and how you have to go about it and to what length you go about it. And does it really matter what age you start? Does that have to be the impotence to starting? And all of you actually separately mentioned to me wanting a second child and the concern about that. And Pete didn't have her first child yet. Right. So what do you think of this? What do you think of what everybody shared at this point?
Well, I think one of the things about fertility journeys that I've come to learn is that I never realized just how many different ways there are, and different types of fertility treatments and processes that you go through in order to have a child. I think I had, minimal information about IVF. I knew that you went in and got the egg and fertilized it and put it in the uterus, and then a baby was made, and that was sort of it. And I didn't know that there was so much involved, and so many different ways to achieve a pregnancy, and so many ups and downs.
And so many ways to kind of have the family that you want.
Yes, right. And the journeys are always, in most cases, harder than you think.
Yes.
They're never quite as simple as go to the doctor, start IVF, or do an IUI, or take a few Clomid pills, and,
So
9 months later.
even though we can all have different paths, like Em was talking about going the alternative medicine route for quite a while before she started to go into traditional medicine. And then she had to find the right doctor who could do the right diagnosis. And as soon as that was done, she got pregnant,
Right.
which is remarkable.
Yes.
For other people, we have to redefine how to have a family, which is a whole nother path that people have to take at times. So I've been fortunate in many ways to work with people who have made sure they've had their families, whether through surrogacy or adoption or donor egg, because the desire to have the family is there. And they wind up all being beautiful families. When you start the process, right, you go in with a lot of hope, and you go in with a lot of excitement. Would you agree with that, or what do you think? Or do you an apprehension, anxiety?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's hope, and you're anxious to start this process. There definitely is anxiety about not exactly knowing how things are going to go. And for me, a lot of it was, everything is revolved around your menstrual cycle. So
Everything,
you have to,
right? Your whole life revolves around your
Right.
menstrual
Yes.
cycle.
So, you have to wait, and I'd be looking at my calendar that would tell me when I was due for my period, and I'd be kind of just trying to figure out how, if I got my period on Tuesday the 23rd, then I'd be going into the doctor on this day, and I'd be assessing my next few months based on
What about
this.
the impact this has on your relationship
Right. Well,
with your partner? I had a support group at one point where somebody was saying that they would like hang from the chandelier if they had to, anything, because when they were ovulating, they were ready.
Mm-hmm.
So everything about the relationship, what you're eating, how you're drinking, where you're going out, when you're having sex, when you're not, everything becomes around your cycle.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What impact has that had on a relationship, or does it have an impact on the relationship?
I think it does.
You
I think
do?
it completely takes over. At least for me, it did. It was like the number one thing on my mind, all consuming all the time. Like everything was about the menstrual cycle month after month.
And everything is just about what
Mm-hmm.
H had mentioned before, which is, come on, I got to hurry up.
Yep.
I got to get this done. I got to get this done. Right?
And I
Did
think
you feel that? I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, when Em mentioned the alternative medicine, I also did that as well. I was very impatient. So every month I told myself I was going to take a break. Along with my husband, I would still get acupuncture, and I was on Chinese herbs and doing massages and all
Right.
these little things in between, and Googling like a madman, which was of no help.
The
But
Googling or the alternative
the
medicine?
Googling.
Okay.
Yeah, Googling
The
can never
Googling-
lead anywhere good.
No.
That's
No.
like my mantra many times is please stop
Yes.
Googling. Please stop
It's a good
researching. It's
one.
good to have some knowledge, but then sometimes it becomes way too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we want to try and reduce stress while we're trying to
Right.
get pregnant because it's stressful enough.
Right.
Right? We talk
Yeah.
about blood flow, and when you're stressed, it's very hard to have normal blood flow. And acupuncture is really wonderful at trying to normalize the blood flow.
Right.
Right.
What do you think, Em?
I have so much to say too, about going back to just the relationships. I remember when we first started all of this, we had heard just about how it can be so hard on husbands and wives, and there can be divorces that happen. And I remember my husband like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And he still says to this day, like, that was the hardest thing, hopefully we'll ever have to go through. And now I understand, like, it was so hard on our relationship, and we got through it, and we're stronger because of it.
So
But
would you say it takes a lot of communication and a lot of understanding of what each other is going through?
yes, so much communication. I mean, it's the ultimate test of your relationship, for sure.
Well, in many ways, but not everybody is able to communicate about everything, because here there was a horrible loss in one story. The other story was going through this journey for so long. And so each of us has to communicate, but I suppose find our own balance with it.
And eventually, after, for us, after we did it a few times, a couple cycles in, it became like such second nature. And the injections were really just like brushing our teeth. I did my own injections sometimes if I had to, and it was just sort of part of our life. But in hindsight, and also during the whole process, I mean, it really was just weighing on your mind constantly, always.
Right, but what Em said also is so important, because she was saying it was really a test of their relationship, and you were saying...
No, that for me it was just all consuming, so it sort of takes over, and I mean...
And at the same time, you were trying to be so supportive.
Yes, so, dealing with the loss of my husband's best friend, that then completely took over, for a long time. That was just something, yeah.
So there's so many things that go on during this, that communication's so important. And it's really fabulous if the outcome is better communication among the couples. I always try and remind people, we don't want the partner to be lost in this process.
Right.
Because the focus is on the one trying to conceive.
Right. The physical part is on the one trying to conceive.
What a wonderful way to put it.
Right. So, and then, mentally it's for both.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely remember kind of what you guys were talking about, just this feeling of like being stuck. If I look back at all those years, like just the planning, like you're planning around your period, you're planning around cycles, you're planning around, if your husband's traveling for work, we face that a lot. So you're planning around these cycles, but then everything else around us, it was like we couldn't make plans. Like it was hard to make vacation plans. Like looking ahead to try to book a vacation, I would be like, yeah, but I might be pregnant then, or we might have to go in for the IVF cycle then, or that's when I'm going to be ovulating. So it just became like we weren't able to like make plans outside of trying to have a baby, and that was really hard on our marriage.
It is, and sometimes when I suggest to people, why don't you take a break? Just take a break for a couple months. You can imagine that there's a lot of pushback.
I would say that breaks are essential, I think. We didn't take a break, and I completely agree with what Em is saying, that the all-consuming, the planning, and especially with like my personality, you're trying to gain some control in a situation where you really don't have any control over. And so I was trying to, again, like squeeze in vacations in between cycles, but we weren't really planning them in advance, because I never, optimistically, I had assumed I was going to be pregnant at one of these times, and I didn't want to, be flying in my first trimester, or whatever scenario that entered my mind based on my foreseeable theoretical plans and my menstrual period and so on. So it's just consuming.
It can be consuming. It is consuming typically. But the word you just used I'd like to just talk about for a minute, which is the word control. Mm-hmm. And what is really the control in this process? Because there is control. It's just identifying where it is.
Control was really hard for me as well. Like I felt so out of control. I was used to, being good at other things in my life. And then when this came up, like I completely fell out of control. I tried to control like my eating more. If I took the right supplements, like I was trying to control all of these other things. My stress, controlling my stress level. So it almost became like I tried to gain control in other areas. It wasn't a good mental headspace.
The word control is really hard, and maybe this is a good thing to talk about before we kind of sum up. The word control is hard because in today's world, when people wait to be a little bit older to start to become pregnant, they've had a whole life going on before this. Now, that's not always. That's sometimes. We've always had lives going on, and usually if we want a child, there's a reason why we wait. We're used to being able to take the direction and do what we want when we want to, and saying, wow, I can't. But knowing that you do have the control to make the decision to either go down a natural path of trying the acupuncture and the herbs and the massage and meditation and all different types of alternative treatments, while in the back of your head thinking maybe something's wrong, or just going by the clock, doing everything the doctor says and thinking I'm doing everything right. But each way along that path, there's decisions to be made, and each decision is within your control. Taking the control to leave a fertility clinic to go to another one. Taking the control to say, I'm not going to do any more IVFs, the doctor saying it's no longer healthy for my body. Taking the control to say, I'm going to have a family, regardless of how I get the family, because that's what I want, and I'm going to love my family. So I was talking on the phone this morning with somebody who adopted 2 special needs children from another country. She wanted a family, and she adores them, and they're so connected and so tight. But when she started this whole journey, I think that was the last thing that she thought of. So if you're kind of giving advice to somebody who's going to begin a fertility journey, and you wanted to sum up how you would give them some guidance, have them feel hopeful, have them feel realistic, right? So their thoughts and their feelings kind of could be in sync. What would you suggest?
Well, I would suggest, I would want to for that person to feel hopeful, of course, but I feel that, a certain realistic perspective of that it may take more than one time of whatever procedure you do. It might not be as easy as going in and doing one procedure and becoming pregnant. So I think I would encourage people that were about to embark on a fertility treatment to just to keep hope in the process, even though there might be many letdowns in the early part and unexpected, disappointments that you didn't even see coming because you didn't even understand the depths of the process prior to beginning. So that would be one thing. And then the second thing that I think that I would want people to do is to not blame themselves. I think that often, especially the female whose body is not becoming pregnant despite all of these medical interventions and alternative treatments, you start to wonder what's wrong with your body. Why can't you do this? Is there something wrong? Your other peers out there, your other female
I love that you said that. I really do. I absolutely love that you said that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really felt when I went through it, I really felt that I somehow was unhealthy, that my body just wasn't, performing
and you felt, I'm so
correctly.
sorry, but you felt the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah. You blame yourself. You can't help it.
And when you blame yourself, all these other feelings come up around it, right? You start to feel guilt. You start to feel shame. You start to feel alone. You may or may not share the information with other people. There's so much more that comes from that.
And then you start to question your past decisions. Why didn't I start earlier? This is my fault. Had I
a lot of self-blame.
Right. Had I prepared for this prior to age 35, this is what I deserve, sort of thing. So, that can really stay with you for a little while.
It can. It can.
But I think it's important to not blame yourself, to maybe not have tried earlier. At least that's what I tell myself. I mean, looking back, and I hope that everything works out, obviously, but I wouldn't have changed anything right now. I was in a different place. So
Exactly.
who's to say I would be where I am now had I done anything differently 3 years ago, 2 years ago?
Well, that's exactly the truth, because life happens.
Exactly that, yeah.
And we have
Life goes on.
experiences.
Right.
And we have these experiences now that help to guide us in the future. Yeah.
Right, and they shape where we're meant to be. That's
Abs-
what I sort of believe
Right,
now.
I believe that too.
This is where you're meant to end up, however you get there.
But definitely a mom. Is there anything you want to add before we end?
Yeah, I agree with everything. The shame, the embarrassment, like just stop blaming yourself. I still though feel that way. Even though like I tell myself like, I shouldn't be ashamed. I still feel shame that I wasn't able to get pregnant and it took so long. I think like when I think about it, like I really wish that these conversations were more easily discussed. I love when like famous people are like openly discussing their IVF. Like Michelle Obama just wrote in her book about how she had IVF with her two girls. Like I think that's amazing. Like I wish that we were able to be more open. And I think for me, like looking back, like I wish I was able to be more open about it. That I didn't feel like I have to hide something. Like, why did I feel like I have to hide it? Hide what was wrong with me at the time.
We're really talking about having the supports in place to be able to openly talk about it. And the interesting thing is that's why all of you wanted to be on today, because you wanted people not to be alone and to feel that there are other people who have been on this journey. H had said she didn't want to give people false hope and false expectations. She wants people to be realistic about, potentially what a path can be when it doesn't happen right away or after a year or two or after all these other treatments. So the interesting thing is you're all very true to yourself in terms of the treatments that you sought out, and you have to commend yourselves for that. And being able to be in a place where you can not blame yourself is a strong place to be in. But allowing yourself to realize that you took control and that you have the families that you want or soon to be, that there's apprehension about next time you get pregnant, but you have the strength to continue that journey if that's what you choose to do. So thank you all for coming on today. I know that this wasn't easy, but I think it was incredibly helpful for a lot of people. So if anybody has any questions or would like any more information, please feel free to contact me at lauriemetz.net. Thank you.